My wife got drunk and flirted with other men at the party. When I confronted her, she laughed and said it was her final cocktail. So I made sure it was her final evening as my wife. Hey Reddit, my name is Blake, and I'm 29 years old. I've been living in Miami with my wife Victoria for the past few years, and we've been married for 5 years now. Up until that Tuesday morning, I genuinely thought everything in our relationship was perfect. I work as a marketing director and make a decent salary, so we've been comfortable financially. Life seemed to be going exactly as planned. That Tuesday morning changed absolutely everything, and it started in the most unexpected way possible. The email that would shatter my world wasn't even addressed to me directly. It was meant for someone named Tyler, but somehow it ended up in our shared inbox instead of her work account. The message was a clipped, flirtatious little note signed with a winking emoji, and when I checked the timestamp, I saw it had been sent at 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Next time, no interruptions," and those 5 words immediately made my stomach drop. That's how my entire world began to unravel. It wasn't through some dramatic confrontation or the classic signs you always hear about, like finding lipstick on a collar or catching the scent of unfamiliar perfume in the car. Instead, it was through a simple technical mistake, a misfired email that landed in the wrong inbox because she must have been rushing, or maybe at that point, she just didn't care enough to be careful anymore. I remember sitting at our dining table that morning, staring at the screen of my laptop. Victoria's coffee was still steaming in front of her untouched chair, but she had already left for the yoga studio. I must have read that email over and over again until the words began to lose their shape and meaning. But the implications became clearer with each reading. Victoria had started this new habit of going to 6 a.m. yoga classes, claiming that the early morning sessions helped clear her head and set a positive tone for her day. What made it even more suspicious was that this particular yoga studio supposedly had a strict no-phone policy, which conveniently meant she couldn't answer my calls if I tried to reach her during those times. But I had noticed that she always came back from these sessions with this particular glow about her, always just a little too flushed for someone who had supposedly just finished a workout. Her hair was always too perfect, too carefully arranged for someone who had been sweating through poses and stretches. I couldn't bring myself to go to work that day. There was absolutely no way I could sit in meetings and pretend to focus on marketing campaigns when something had literally detonated in my chest. It felt like I was carrying shrapnel under my ribs, just waiting for it to shift and cause even more damage. The physical sensation was almost unbearable. This constant, sharp pressure that made it hard to breathe normally. Instead of confronting Victoria immediately or calling her to demand an explanation, I decided to dig deeper. I opened a new document on my computer and carefully copied the suspicious email, making sure to preserve all the metadata and timestamp information. Then I did something I'm not particularly proud of, but felt I had to do. I searched through her phone backups. You see, months ago, I had quietly installed syncing software on both our devices. At the time, I told myself it was for security purposes, or maybe that's just what I wanted to believe. Perhaps deep down, some part of me had already sensed that something wasn't right and was preparing for this moment. Whatever the reason, I was grateful for that decision now. What I found in those backups was more smoke, more evidence of deception. There was an entire message thread with Tyler that had been carefully deleted from her phone, but not from the cloud storage. The messages were filled with little inside jokes that I'd never heard before, references to places and experiences that were completely foreign to me. But what really made me feel sick to my stomach were the photos she had taken. Photos that she had clearly taken in our bed. She had cropped them tightly and carefully, trying to avoid any identifying features. But our headboard was distinctive enough that I could tell immediately where they had been taken. These weren't just casual photos either. They were deliberately intimate, taken specifically to send to someone else. The thought that she was taking these pictures in our shared space, in the bed where we slept together every night, made me feel physically ill. The nausea I felt wasn't just the typical gut-twisting, mouth-drying kind that comes with bad news. This was something deeper and more unsettling. Like the entire world had suddenly turned plastic and brittle around me. Everything I had trusted, everything I had believed in, felt like it was rotting at the edges. The foundation of my reality had shifted, and I wasn't sure what was real anymore. We had been married for 5 years at that point, and we didn't have any children yet. The truth is, we had been waiting for the right time. Or at least that's what Victoria always said. I would have been ready to start a family the second we became financially stable, but she always found reasons to push it back. There was always something, a promotion she was working toward, a yoga retreat she wanted to attend, or simply just not the right time yet. Looking back now, I realized that all of this was happening while she was secretly sending intimate photos to someone else from our sheets. The irony was devastating. Here I was, thinking we were building a life together, planning for our future, while she was living an entirely separate existence that I knew nothing about. That evening, I decided to maintain our normal routine. I cooked dinner just like I always did. It was pizza night, which had always been her favorite. When she came home, she dropped her yoga bag by the stairs exactly as she always did, and she kissed me on the cheek like absolutely nothing had happened. It was surreal, watching her go through these familiar motions while knowing that my soul had been replaced by cold iron since sunrise. We sat down to eat, and she chatted casually about her yoga instructor, telling me how he was tough on her form but in a good way. I nodded along and even managed to smile at appropriate moments, playing my part in this bizarre performance. At one point, she laughed and reached across the table to touch my hand, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom because I was afraid I was going to throw up right there on the table. For the rest of that evening, I found myself watching her like she was a complete stranger wearing a familiar skin suit. How had I missed all the signs? How had I been so blind to what was happening right in front of me? I started noticing things that I had previously dismissed or rationalized away. The way she would flinch slightly when I walked into a room too quietly, as if she was always on guard. The new passwords on her devices that she claimed were for security reasons. The defensive tone that crept into her voice every time I asked simple questions about where she had been or what she had been doing. Later that night, we settled on the couch to watch one of her favorite shows, some mindless reality television that she was always trying to get me to watch with her. She curled up next to me and rested her head on my shoulder, just like she had done countless times before. But this time, I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. I just stared at the screen while her phone buzzed gently on the cushion beside her. At first, she didn't check it, probably because she thought I might notice. But then, when she thought I had dozed off, she moved slowly and carefully to lift the phone. I watched the glow from the screen light up her face, and I could see her thumbs moving as she typed a response. Her breathing changed completely. It became deeper, steadier, more focused. She was fully engaged with whatever conversation she was having, more engaged than she had been with me all evening. That's when I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I leaned back just a little and whispered quietly, "Tell him I said hi." Victoria froze for what felt like 5 full seconds. She didn't move a single muscle, didn't even seem to breathe. Then suddenly, she let out this short, sharp, breathy laugh that sounded completely artificial. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice had a forced casualness to it that immediately gave her away. Without saying another word, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I picked up the printed email that I had folded earlier and carried it back to the living room. I tossed it onto her lap without ceremony, then stepped back to watch her reaction. Her face drained of color like someone had literally pulled the plug on her blood. She stared down at the page, not saying a single word, and that silence told me absolutely everything I needed to know. She didn't look up at me right away. Instead, she just sat there staring at the paper. Her fingers clenched around it like she was trying to crush it into dust. But the paper wouldn't tear, no matter how tightly she gripped it. The only sounds in the room were the faint hum of our refrigerator and the soft buzz of her phone, which was still resting beside her thigh and lighting up one more time with yet another message. She didn't dare check it now, not with me standing there with my hands in my pockets, waiting for her to say something. Finally, she exhaled, one slow, deliberate breath through her nose. When she spoke, her voice was low, careful, and measured, like she was mentally choosing which lie to lean into first. "So what? You've been spying on me now?" she asked. I didn't answer her question. I wasn't about to validate that accusation with a response. I wasn't the one who had been creeping around in the dark behind someone's back. I wasn't the one who had been rewriting our marriage vows in secret messages in apartment parking lots. I had every right to protect myself when I suspected something was wrong. She looked up at me then, and I could see her eyes had narrowed, her lips pressed tight together. There was no remorse in her expression, not even fake shock or surprise, just quiet fury that she had been caught, that the mask she had worn so expertly had finally cracked, and that I had the audacity to be standing there holding the broken pieces. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, her tone almost challenging. I walked over and sat down in the armchair across from her, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees and staring her down. I said absolutely nothing. I had learned that silence was often sharper than yelling, and I knew Victoria well enough to know that she hated silence more than anything else. Victoria scoffed and leaned back against the couch cushions. "It didn't mean anything," she said dismissively. "He's not important." I still said nothing, just continued to stare at her. "He's not you," she added, as if that somehow made it better. That line landed like a physical slap. As if comparing a liar to a fool was some kind of improvement. As if being "not me" was somehow a crime worse than sneaking into another man's apartment while I waited at home, thinking she was doing stretches and yoga poses. When my voice finally came, it surprised even me with how calm it sounded. "How long?" I asked. Victoria flinched, but not from the words themselves. She flinched from the calmness in my tone, the controlled way I was handling this conversation. "A few months," she muttered, barely audible. My jaw tensed as I processed this information. I could see her watching my reaction, and she immediately started backtracking. "Okay, 5 months," she admitted. 5 months. That meant this had been going on since before Christmas. The entire winter season, all the way through spring. While we were booking flights for our anniversary trip, while I was carefully selecting and buying her that expensive necklace she had admired, while she was making me birthday dinner and whispering that she loved me as I fell asleep beside her. All of it had been a lie. I nodded once, slowly, letting the timeline sink in. Then I asked the question I was dreading but needed to know. Was it just him? Her eyes flickered for just a moment, and that tiny pause told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "There were others," I said, not really asking anymore but stating what I had already guessed. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stood up abruptly and walked over to the window, crossing her arms and staring out at the street below, like the passing cars might somehow provide her with answers or an escape route. I let her sit in the weight of that silence. I wanted her to feel the full impact of everything she had systematically unraveled over the past months. This wasn't just one mistake, one moment of weakness or poor judgment. This was systematic erosion, months and months of little betrayals that had worn down everything we had built together until there was nothing left but hollow gestures and the fading memory of what we used to be. "I was bored," she said suddenly, as if that simple statement could somehow explain or justify everything that had happened. The words hung in the air between us like an accusation. "We got dull," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she built her defense. "You work all the time. You barely notice me anymore." I actually laughed at that, once, short and bitter. "You mean I trusted you?" I said. That made her whip around to face me, her mouth already opening to form some kind of protest or counter-argument. But I held up my hand to stop her before she could get started. "No, don't," I said firmly. "Don't make this about me. Don't try to twist this into something I did wrong." "I'm not twisting anything," she started, her voice beginning to rise with indignation. "You cheated, Victoria," I cut in, my voice quiet but sharp and final. "Repeatedly. You looked me in the eye every single day and chose to lie to me. Don't blame it on routine. Don't insult me with that excuse." For the first time since this conversation started, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. It was like the truth had finally caught up to her, and she was realizing that her carefully constructed justifications weren't going to work on me anymore. She sank back down onto the couch, putting one hand against her temple like she was suddenly getting a headache. "So now what?" she asked. I stood up from the armchair and looked down at her. "Now what?" I repeated her question back to her. The answer was already forming in my mind, crystal clear and unavoidable. Now I sleep in the guest room. Now I talk to a lawyer. Now I change the passwords and the locks. Now I start building a life that doesn't revolve around pretending my partner is someone she clearly never was. But I didn't say all of that out loud. Not yet. Instead, I just looked at her sitting there on our couch, in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of the life we had built together. And I said simply, "You'll find out in the morning." Then I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me, leaving her alone with the weight of what she had done and what was about to happen next. I didn't sleep that night either. The guest room had this musty smell, like dust and old cardboard boxes that we had never gotten around to unpacking from our last move. They were still stacked in the corner, a reminder of all the things we had planned to do together, all the ways we were going to make this house into our perfect home. The bed creaked every time I shifted position, but mostly it was the silence that kept me awake. It was a different kind of silence now than what I had experienced earlier. This wasn't the tense, loaded silence of confrontation. This was something heavier and more final. It was the kind of silence that fills a house when a lie finally dies in it, when the last pretense has been stripped away and there's nothing left but the truth. She didn't come to the door that night. She didn't try to explain herself further or attempt to salvage what was left of our relationship. I could hear her moving around softly in the master bedroom, like she thought if she made herself quiet enough, I might somehow forget she was there. That was always her strategy when things got difficult. To disappear. To make herself small and invisible until the problem resolved itself or someone else fixed it for her. At 7:45 the next morning, the doorbell rang. Victoria was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. I had been up already for hours, dressed and mentally sharp because I knew exactly who was at the door before I even opened it. It was Derek, my friend since college. He's always been the steady, stoic, measured type, exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when your world is falling apart. He was the only person I had trusted enough to call the night before, the only one who knew what was happening. He stepped inside, took one look at my face, and simply said, "You ready?" I nodded, and we moved quickly and efficiently. The bags were already packed, one suitcase and one duffel bag. I hadn't taken everything, just what really mattered. My important documents, my laptop, a few changes of clothes. I left the rest behind for her to deal with. She could keep the furniture, the framed photos of happier times, the vinyl records we used to play on Sunday mornings when we were still pretending to be happy. I was letting her live in the museum of what she had single-handedly destroyed. I left a note for Victoria. Nothing dramatic or emotional, just the simple facts laid out clearly. "You made your choices, I'm making mine," I wrote. Short, direct, and honest. By the time she finally came downstairs, groggy and wrapped in one of my old hoodies that she had no right to be wearing anymore, the front door was already closing behind me. I didn't look back as we walked to Derek's car. There was nothing left in that house that I needed to see. We stayed at Derek's place that weekend. His spare room was cold and sparse, but it was mine. There was no lingering perfume on the pillow, no hidden phone tucked under the sheets, no lies hiding in the corners. Just clean space and fresh air and a silence that didn't deceive me or make me question my own sanity. Saturday afternoon, my phone started ringing. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, but I didn't answer. A few minutes later, she sent a text message. "Can we talk?" Then another one, more frantic this time. "This is our marriage. Don't do this." And then, "We can fix it." The nerve she had was absolutely astounding. After everything she had done, after months of systematic betrayal and deception, she still thought she could control the narrative. She still believed she could manipulate me into coming back, into accepting her version of events where somehow this was all fixable with a conversation and some empty promises. By Sunday night, the mask had finally cracked completely. She sent me a message that simply said, "You weren't perfect either." And there it was. The inevitable spiral. The desperate flailing of someone who had never actually thought she would get caught, who had never considered that I might have enough self-respect to walk away from her lies. Her tone had shifted completely from remorse to accusation, like flipping a light switch. She was no longer the apologetic wife who had made some mistakes. Now, she was the victim, and I was somehow the villain in her rewritten version of our story. I replied to her just once. I wasn't perfect, but I was faithful. That used to matter. She didn't text me again after that. That same night, Derek and I sat in his kitchen, each of us nursing a beer in comfortable silence. He didn't ask for the gory details of what had happened. He was too good a friend for that. Instead, he just handed me the beer and said, "You're handling this better than I would." I shook my head. "I'm not really," I admitted. Inside, I felt like a battlefield where rage and grief and relief were all fighting for control. I kept mentally replaying every moment over the past 5 months when she had looked me in the eye and told me she loved me. Every lingering glance I had misinterpreted, every weekend trip where she had suddenly developed a headache or claimed she was just too tired. I was starting to realize that she had been emotionally gone from our marriage for much longer than I had understood. Her body had just finally followed where her heart had already been living. This wasn't simply betrayal. It was a slow, methodical erasure of everything we had built together. And now I had to somehow rebuild my entire life from whatever pieces were left after her systematic destruction. Monday morning hit me like a freight train. I woke up to the pale, blue-gray light of dawn leaking through unfamiliar blinds, my back sore from sleeping on a mattress that wasn't mine. I had forgotten to set an alarm, but I didn't need one anyway. My body was running on pure instinct and survival mode at this point. There were no texts from Victoria waiting for me when I checked my phone. No missed calls, at least not yet. I showered in Derek's bathroom, ate toast that I could barely taste, and then sat at his kitchen table scrolling through work emails like my entire world wasn't collapsing in the background. I had officially taken the day off, but there were urgent matters I needed to handle that couldn't wait. First on my list was checking our shared bank account, something I probably should have done immediately, but I had been too emotionally devastated to think practically over the weekend. When I logged into our account, I just stared at the screen in disbelief. There was only $2,000 left. Out of the almost $12,000 we had saved together, Victoria had quietly moved money over the weekend. The transaction history showed transfers to an unfamiliar checking account that I had never seen before. The recipient names were masked, showing only account numbers, but the dates and times were crystal clear. Saturday morning at 8:23 a.m., there had been 4 separate withdrawals. I wasn't particularly surprised by this discovery, but I was absolutely done playing the passive victim in Victoria's game. I immediately called the bank and froze the shared account. Then I opened a completely new account under only my name, updated all my direct deposit information for my paychecks, and changed all my banking passwords. By the time Victoria called me at exactly 10:07 a.m., I was fully prepared for the conversation. I let the phone ring a few times before answering, and I made sure to put it on speaker. "Hi," she said, sounding slightly out of breath. "I didn't think you'd pick up." "You moved the money," I said calmly, cutting straight to the point. There was a pause on her end, and then she immediately went on the defensive. "It's our account," she said. "I didn't think you were coming back." "I wasn't coming back," I replied evenly. "But you moved the money before you even bothered to ask me if we could talk. You made that decision while I was still processing everything that had happened." "That's not fair," she protested. "You think you get to talk to me about fairness?" I asked, my voice remaining calm but pointed. The line went quiet, and I could hear her breathing. She was probably pacing around our house, or rather her house now, maybe still wearing that hoodie that she had no right to be wearing. "I just needed time to figure things out," she said finally. I panicked. "You panicked, so you decided to empty our joint account?" I replied. "I was scared you'd leave me with nothing," she shot back, her voice rising. After everything she had done, I actually laughed, a cold, sharp sound that surprised even me. "You left yourself," I said. "You just didn't physically walk out the door." She let out a frustrated sigh. "I didn't think you'd react like this," she said. "You mean you thought I'd be stupid enough to stay?" I replied. That comment ended the conversation. She hung up without another word, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this had never been about guilt or genuine regret. It was entirely about control. She wasn't sorry that she had cheated or that she had lied to me for months. She was sorry that she had lost the upper hand in our relationship. The performance of playing the good wife had officially ended the moment I refused to fall for Act 2, the apology tour designed to manipulate me back into compliance. That afternoon, I had a meeting with a lawyer, a friend of Derek's who came highly recommended. He was discreet, efficient, and refreshingly professional about the whole situation. I laid everything out for him. The timeline of events, all the evidence I had gathered, and the screenshots of the messages I had discovered. The lawyer barely blinked as I explained the situation, which told me he had seen this type of case many times before. "You've got a strong case," he said matter-of-factly, "especially with those phone backups and the documented evidence." We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting the initial divorce petition. Having everything laid out in legal terms somehow made it feel more real, more final. This wasn't just an emotional decision anymore. It was a legal process that would officially end what Victoria had already destroyed. That night, I lay in Derek's guest bed once again, staring at the ceiling with my phone turned off and the door locked. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I realized something that actually haunted me. I didn't miss her. That revelation was more unsettling than all the anger and betrayal combined. I missed who I had thought she was, but that person had never actually existed. Victoria had been playing a role, and I had been in love with her performance rather than her true self. Now I was finally free to stop pretending that the woman I had married was real, and surprisingly, that freedom felt more liberating than devastating. By Thursday, word had started to spread through our social circles. Not because I had said anything, I would never air our dirty laundry publicly, but because people talk. And Victoria's sudden radio silence was speaking volumes. This was the same woman who used to document every avocado toast and mimosa on social media, who treated her online presence like a full-time job. Now she had completely vanished from all platforms, and in her world, that kind of silence was essentially a public confession. The first person to reach out was Jessica, who had been Victoria's best friend for years. She texted me at 9:43 a.m. "Hey, I heard you guys are separated. Just checking if you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Jessica was the same friend who had supposedly been hosting Victoria on several of those nights when Victoria claimed she was having girls' nights out. The same nights when Victoria was actually in an apartment with someone else entirely. I could have called Jessica out right then and there. I could have sent her screenshots of the evidence, confronted both of them, and demanded explanations and honesty. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I simply replied, "I'm fine. Just needed some space. Thanks for asking." I kept my response simple and controlled because I wasn't interested in winning people over or convincing anyone of my side of the story. I wasn't trying to publicly expose Victoria or destroy her reputation. She was perfectly capable of unraveling herself. She already had all the rope and matches she needed to burn down her own credibility. Then Friday arrived, and with it came an unexpected confrontation. I was sitting on the front step of Derek's house, sipping my morning coffee and watching the sky transition from silver to brilliant orange, when Victoria's car pulled up. It was the same car we had bought together 2 years earlier, back when we were still making joint decisions and planning for a shared future. She didn't park properly in the driveway. Instead, she stopped awkwardly halfway up, leaving the engine running like she was directing some kind of dramatic scene in her head. The car door swung open, and she stepped out slowly, wearing sunglasses, even though the sun hadn't fully cleared the trees yet. "Hey," she said, her voice artificially casual, like we hadn't just burned our entire marriage to ash over the past week. I didn't stand up from where I was sitting, and I didn't offer any kind of greeting in return. I just waited, letting the silence stretch between us while I sipped my coffee. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable with my lack of response. "Can we talk?" she asked. "No," I replied simply. "I just need a few minutes," she insisted, her voice taking on a slightly pleading tone. "Please." "No," I repeated. Her jaw tightened with frustration. "Seriously?" she asked, her tone becoming sharper. "You had months to talk, Victoria," I said calmly. "You picked everything except honesty during that time." She took a step closer to where I was sitting, but I remained exactly where I was, arms crossed, maintaining my position. "I'm not here to beg," she said, her voice gaining an edge. "I'm here to clear the air." I finally looked up at her directly. "There's no air left," I said. "You poisoned all of it." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're being dramatic," she accused. That comment pushed something deep inside me. I stood up slowly, deliberately, and set my coffee mug down on the step. Then I took a single step toward her, close enough that she could see I was completely serious. "You lied to me every single day for nearly half a year," I said, my voice low and controlled. "You looked me in the face and told me you loved me while you were sneaking around like a teenager with a burner phone." "I didn't plan for it to happen!" she shouted suddenly, her composure finally cracking. "You stopped trying! You stopped making me feel wanted! You buried yourself in work and projects, and I was lonely!" "And your solution," I said, my voice dropping even lower, "was to open your legs for someone else." Her eyes flashed with pure rage, not with guilt or remorse, but with fury at being called out so bluntly. "You're disgusting," she snapped. "No," I said with complete calm, "I'm done." I turned around and started walking back toward Derek's house, leaving her standing there in the driveway. She didn't follow me immediately. She just stood there for a long moment, probably trying to process the fact that her manipulation tactics weren't working anymore. Finally, I heard her mutter under her breath, "You'll regret this." I paused in the doorway without turning around. "Maybe," I said, "but I'll never regret leaving the person you became." Then I stepped inside and shut the door firmly behind me. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply. It wasn't relief I felt, not exactly, but for the first time in weeks, the crushing weight I had been carrying seemed to shift slightly. It was finally starting to lift, piece by piece. The weekend that followed was strange and quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than what I had experienced before. This wasn't the brutal silence of betrayal and deception. This was something deeper and more peaceful, like the sound of finally being able to breathe after being underwater for far too long. The legal paperwork was moving forward steadily. The emotional landmines were beginning to fade beneath the surface of my daily routine. And for the first time since I had walked out of that house, I was beginning to feel something that felt dangerously close to genuine peace. Then Sunday happened, and it brought with it something I absolutely never could have anticipated. It started with a message from someone whose name I recognized, but had never actually spoken to before. The text came from Tyler. Yes, Tyler, the same man Victoria had been seeing, or at least the one I had caught her with through that misdirected email. His phone number was completely unfamiliar to me, but his tone in the message definitely wasn't what I had expected. The first text came at 10:12 a.m. "Hey man, I know we don't know each other, but can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my mouth going dry. Of all the absurd and unexpected developments I had imagined might happen, this definitely wasn't on the list. A minute passed, then another, and my phone buzzed again. 10:14 a.m. I didn't know she was married, I swear. I didn't find out until last week. I still didn't respond. I just sat there staring at my phone, trying to process what was happening. 10:15 a.m. She said you were separated, said it was over, that you were just roommates waiting for the paperwork. I had no idea, man. I never would have gotten involved if I had known the truth. I set my phone down on the table, my heart pounding. But it wasn't pounding with jealousy or even anger. It was pounding with complete disbelief. This situation had never really been about Tyler, and it never would be. It was about the systematic rot that Victoria had been covering up with layers of excuses and manipulation for months. The revelation that she had lied to him, too, wasn't particularly surprising. But now her web of deception was spilling out beyond the boundaries of our marriage and into the lives of complete strangers. People who had never asked to be part of her twisted narrative were now getting hurt by her lies. I didn't text Tyler back. What could I possibly say to him? What words could adequately address this situation? About an hour later, the flood of messages from Victoria started. First, there were calls from her number, which I had already blocked. Then came the text messages, dozens of them, each one more frantic and accusatory than the last. I can't believe you talked to him. You had no right to drag him into this. Now he thinks I'm some kind of homewrecker. Why are you trying to ruin my life? I made one mistake. That last message made my blood boil. One mistake. That wasn't how Tyler was describing the situation. That wasn't what I knew to be true based on months of evidence. One mistake didn't span 5 months, involve stolen money, include deleted message threads, and encompass entire parallel relationships with multiple people. This wasn't a slip-up or a moment of poor judgment. This was a deliberate campaign, a carefully curated project that she had been managing behind my back for nearly half a year. I finally decided to respond to her barrage of messages. You told him we were separated while we were still sleeping in the same bed. While I was planning our anniversary trip. You can lie to whoever you want, but don't expect me to clean up your mess. There was no immediate reply from her. Then, about 10 minutes later, she sent one final message. You're so cold now. Who even are you? I stared at that message for a long time. It was pure projection, classic manipulation. She didn't recognize me anymore because she had never truly seen me to begin with. She had only seen what I provided for her. The structure, the financial security, the illusion of commitment and stability, while she slipped away to entertain her boredom with other people. Later that evening, Derek and I sat outside on his back porch again, sharing that comfortable silence that only comes with old friendships. The kind of quiet where you don't need to fill the space with unnecessary words. You think she's going to make this divorce process difficult? He asked eventually. I didn't hesitate with my answer. She already is. Derek nodded knowingly, then said, You're doing the right thing, you know. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't doubt that statement. The truth had finally burned away everything it needed to burn. There was no going back to the fantasy, no illusion left to cling to. Just me, my integrity, my self-respect, and the long, clean road stretching out ahead of me. On Monday morning, I received something that caught me completely off guard. A letter. Not an email or a text message, but an actual physical letter delivered by courier. There was no return address on the envelope, just my name written in that familiar looping handwriting that I used to find charming, but now made my stomach turn. I almost didn't open it. I stood there holding the envelope, debating whether I wanted to subject myself to whatever emotional manipulation Victoria had crafted this time. But curiosity, with its cruel sense of timing, won out in the end. Inside was a single page of cream-colored, expensive paper. Victoria's handwriting was unusually neat and rehearsed, like she had practiced writing this letter multiple times before settling on the final version. The paper even smelled faintly of the perfume she had worn to our wedding, which struck me as either pathetically sentimental or calculatingly manipulative. The letter began simply, Blake, I've been thinking a lot, and I know nothing I say can undo what happened, but I still need to say it. I was wrong. Not just for what I did, but for how I tried to justify it. I blamed you because it was easier than admitting I was bored with myself. I thought if someone else saw me, wanted me, maybe I'd feel something again. But it was never about them. It was about how much of me I'd lost, and how I decided to make you pay for it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything, but I'm sorry for what it's worth. Victoria. There was no signature, no flourish at the end, just that simple closing and her name. I didn't know how to process what I was reading. Was this genuine honesty, or was it just another calculated angle? Maybe it was one last attempt to control the narrative, to make our ending feel mutual, rather than like the betrayal it actually was. Perhaps she was trying to soften the story before it reached too many people in our social circles. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of any sentimental feelings, but purely for record-keeping purposes. I had learned through this entire experience that keeping receipts wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called with news that made Victoria's timing with that letter seem suspiciously convenient. Her attorney's response just came through, he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. She's contesting the divorce. I paused, trying to process this information. On what grounds? I asked. She's claiming emotional abandonment, he explained. She says she was isolated and neglected, and that the infidelity wasn't the cause of your marriage problems. It was the symptom. I nearly laughed out loud. Of course. The letter I had just received wasn't a confession or an apology. It was a legal chess move, a strategic setup for her defense. She wasn't trying to make amends. She was trying to flip the entire script. She's attempting to rewrite the narrative, I said flatly. Exactly, my lawyer confirmed. We'll respond with all the documentation we've gathered, but I need to prepare you. This is going to get significantly uglier before it gets better. I thanked him and hung up, then sat in Derek's kitchen in complete silence. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This had become a full-scale war, and Victoria wasn't interested in closure or moving forward. She wanted control. If she couldn't have the marriage, she would settle for controlling the story. She would claw and twist the narrative until someone, anyone, would buy her version of events. But she had underestimated one crucial thing. She had taught me to stop trusting masks and facades. And at this point, I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The subpoena arrived on a Wednesday, delivered to Derek's doorstep by a man in a black windbreaker, carrying a clipboard and wearing a fake professional smile. I signed for it without saying a word, took the envelope, and closed the door behind me. Inside was a formal request for all of my communications from the past year. Emails, text messages, work logs, anything and everything that Victoria's legal team could potentially use to support her claim of emotional abandonment. She was going full scorched earth now, with no retreat and absolutely no shame. The audacity of it would have been laughable if it weren't so coldly strategic. It was clear that she wasn't even trying to win me back anymore. This wasn't about love or reconciliation or saving our marriage. This was entirely about damage control and pride. She wanted to step out of this situation looking like the victim rather than the perpetrator. I spent the next 3 days meticulously compiling my entire digital footprint. I gathered files, screenshots, and documentation, then sent everything to my attorney. I logged every phone call, screenshotted every timeline, and cross-referenced each one of Victoria's lies with her own documented actions. Everything was organized, exact, and dated with precision. My attorney called me on Friday evening, and I could hear something unreadable in his tone. I've seen a lot of different tactics in my years of practice, he said slowly. But this is exceptionally cold. She thinks if she burns everything down around her, she can somehow step out of the wreckage looking clean. She's about to learn otherwise, I replied with quiet determination. That weekend, I received the second letter from Victoria. This time, it wasn't handwritten in her familiar script. Instead, it was typed on official letterhead with neat margins, numbered paragraphs, and legal citations. This was clearly a statement that had been prepared by her legal team rather than something personal from her. The document claimed that I had been emotionally absent throughout our marriage, verbally critical, and even controlling. It alleged that I had undermined her self-worth by working excessive hours, that I had refused to provide emotional and physical support, and that I had actually shamed her for seeking affection elsewhere when I failed to provide it at home. I read through the document once, then read it again. My hands were trembling, but not with fear or grief. I was shaking with pure, concentrated fury. Victoria was systematically rewriting our entire shared history like it was a screenplay, turning me into some kind of ghost or villain who had been lurking in the shadows of our relationship. She was conveniently forgetting about the couple's therapy sessions that she had skipped, the dinner dates that she'd canceled at the last minute, and the countless hours I had spent sitting alone at our dining room table while she claimed to be working late. She was erasing the memory of all the nights I had run baths for her, bought her flowers, and written little notes on our bathroom mirror just to see her smile, all while she was secretly messaging other men behind my back. I picked up my phone and typed a single line in response. "So this is who you've decided to become." She didn't reply immediately, but I knew she had seen the message. Her silence wasn't hesitation or uncertainty. It was confidence. She genuinely believed that she had buried me completely in her carefully constructed narrative. But she had made one critical miscalculation. I had brought my own shovel to this fight, and I wasn't about to let her write the ending to my story. The court date was scheduled for early August. Until then, it was essentially a cold war between us. There was no direct contact, just an uncomfortable silence that was padded by lawyers and loaded paperwork. Each side maneuvered and repositioned themselves, bracing for the inevitable collision that was coming. But beneath all the legal language and controlled correspondence, something deeper was happening to me. Something fundamental was cracking and shifting, but not in the way you might expect. I wasn't breaking down or collapsing under the pressure. Instead, something inside me that had been buried for years under layers of compromise and careful silence was finally starting to wake up. It started with small things at first. I found myself laughing at Derek's jokes, and the laughter didn't feel forced or artificial. I started playing music at a normal volume instead of keeping it at a whisper. I noticed that I was standing a little straighter when I walked, like I wasn't carrying some invisible weight on my shoulders anymore. As the days passed, I began to realize how often I had been filtering myself throughout my marriage. It was as if I had been afraid to be too loud, too blunt, or simply too much for Victoria to handle. I had spent years shrinking myself down to fit into whatever space she was willing to give me. Now, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to make myself smaller. One morning, I took Buddy on a long walk before sunrise. The entire neighborhood was still asleep, soaked in that early blue quiet that always made the world feel honest and peaceful. As I walked through the empty streets with my dog, memories started coming back to me. Not just memories of Victoria and our failed marriage, but memories of who I used to be before all of this happened. I remembered the version of myself that had existed before my entire world became shaped around the delicate act of tiptoeing around someone else's moods and expectations. There was a part of me that felt genuine grief during these quiet moments, but it wasn't grief for Victoria or even for our marriage. I was mourning the loss of the version of myself that had somehow believed love was supposed to hurt a little, that relationships required constant sacrifice and compromise of your core identity. That version of Blake had spent years waiting for Victoria's approval to feel like he was enough. He had waited for her validation like he was waiting for scraps from a table, never demanding more and never expecting better treatment. But that man was gone now, and I was surprised to discover that I didn't miss him. In his place was someone who didn't flinch when Victoria's name appeared on caller ID. Someone who didn't spend his days walking on eggshells or wondering what mood she would be in when she came home, which she did attempt to do again. Victoria showed up at Derek's house that Friday, uninvited and bold as ever. I opened the door to find her standing there wearing sunglasses and a ponytail, holding a coffee cup like she was just casually dropping by a friend's house. She had that same easy smirk on her face that she used to wear when she lied about having just one drink after work. "I thought we could talk without lawyers," she said, as if this were the most reasonable suggestion in the world. I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at her standing there on Derek's doorstep. She tilted her head and lowered her sunglasses slightly. "Just 10 minutes," she said. So I let her in. She walked through Derek's house like she owned the place, moving with that familiar confidence, and sat down on the couch like it was still hers to claim. "I miss you," she said, and the words hit the air like a false note in what should have been a familiar song. "I miss what we had," she continued. I stood up and looked down at her. "What exactly do you think we had?" I asked. She blinked, clearly not expecting that question. "A life," she said. "Stability. Memories. We had history together." "No," I said calmly. "I had stability. I made the memories. You had distractions." She exhaled slowly. "I made mistakes," she said. "But you destroyed trust," I replied. "Not once, but repeatedly. You lied. You manipulated me. And now you're trying to weaponize your own betrayal like it was something I caused." Victoria went quiet for a moment, and then her voice became softer, more vulnerable. I'm scared, she said. That admission was the truth. That was the only real, genuine thing she had said all week, possibly in months. For the first time in this entire conversation, she wasn't performing or manipulating. She was just being honest about her emotional state. I sat down across from her and looked at her calmly. You should be, I said. Not because of what's happening legally, I continued, but because you looked at someone who loved you without conditions, and you decided that wasn't enough. Her eyes began to shimmer, but no actual tears fell. Victoria's tears had always been carefully rehearsed performances, deployed at strategic moments for maximum emotional impact. I'm not coming back, I said finally, with absolute certainty. Not now, not ever. And for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun, she didn't argue with me. She didn't try to negotiate or manipulate or convince me otherwise. She just stood up slowly, adjusted her purse strap over her shoulder and said, "You'll be sorry." But the words lacked any real heat or conviction. They sounded hollow, like something she felt obligated to say rather than something she actually believed. "No," I replied with quiet confidence. "You will." She didn't look back when she walked out of Derek's house, but I stood at the window and watched the door long after it had clicked shut behind her. I wasn't watching with sadness or regret or any lingering hope for reconciliation. I was watching with a deep sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months, because I knew that the next time I walked into a courtroom, I wouldn't be dragging the weight of our failed relationship behind me like chains. I would be walking in as the man who had finally remembered who he was before Victoria had convinced him to become someone smaller. The courtroom, when the day finally arrived, was exactly what I had expected. Quiet and sterile, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and lawyers shuffling papers like they were weapons. Across the aisle sat Victoria, dressed in white like irony itself. Her expression was calm, maybe even bored, as if this entire legal proceeding was somehow beneath her dignity. She wouldn't look directly at me during the proceedings, and I didn't need her to. The judge reviewed our case with professional detachment, going through the allegations of infidelity, financial misconduct, and emotional neglect that both sides had presented. Victoria's legal team had filed their counterclaim, but the evidence I had gathered was comprehensive and undeniable. Every document was there, every timestamp was recorded, every deleted message had been resurrected with precision. Her carefully constructed story began to fray with every passing minute. I didn't testify with rage or dramatic emotion. Instead, I spoke clearly and factually, with no embellishment and no theatrical performance. I simply laid out the truth, and the truth was heavy enough to speak for itself. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat during the playback of her own messages. When the screenshots of her communications were displayed on the courtroom screens, when her apartment receipts and financial transactions were mentioned in detail, I could see her facade beginning to crack. Her lawyer tried desperately to pivot, to reframe the narrative and suggest that I had been emotionally unavailable and unwilling to work on our marriage. But courtrooms aren't built on spin and manipulation. They're built on facts and evidence. And the fact was that she had broken her marriage vows repeatedly, systematically, and deliberately. The judge's ruling came that same day, which was faster than I had expected. The divorce was granted as uncontested due to irreconcilable differences. Victoria's claims of emotional abandonment were dismissed due to lack of supporting evidence. I was awarded the house, the car, and custody of Buddy. She was ordered to return the missing funds from our joint account or face civil penalties. Victoria's face didn't change at all when the judge's verdict was read aloud in the courtroom. Her expression remained completely neutral, almost blank. She stood up when instructed, gathered her purse with deliberate movements, and then finally, she looked directly at me for the first time since we had entered the courtroom. There was no apology in her eyes when our gazes met. There was no regret, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, no recognition of her own responsibility in destroying our marriage. Instead, there was only a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe disbelief that she hadn't somehow managed to win this final battle, or perhaps the dawning realization that I had actually walked away from her and never looked back. We didn't speak to each other. There were no final words exchanged, no last-minute attempts at reconciliation or closure. Victoria simply walked out of the courtroom like the entire proceeding didn't matter to her. But I knew better. I knew it mattered deeply, and I knew she was devastated by the outcome. I was the last person to leave the courtroom. I took my time gathering my papers and thanking my attorney. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a brilliant blue, wide open and free. Derek was waiting for me at the curb, leaning against his car with a patient expression. "Well?" he asked when I approached. I just nodded. "It's over," I said simply. And it truly was over. Not just the marriage, not just the legal proceedings, but something much more fundamental than that. The version of myself that had once bent and twisted himself to fit into someone else's chaos was gone forever. That man had died somewhere in the process of discovering Victoria's betrayal, and what remained was someone who had been rebuilt from the bones of that betrayal. I was stronger now, quieter in my confidence, and clearer about what I would and wouldn't accept in my life. Here's what I've learned through this entire experience, and what I want to share with anyone who might be facing something similar. If someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't make excuses for their behavior, don't rationalize away the red flags, and don't convince yourself that you can love them into becoming someone better. If your gut instinct tightens every time they smile at you, if something deep in your stomach tells you that something isn't right, listen to that feeling. Your intuition is trying to protect you from something that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. And if love starts to feel like debt, if you find yourself constantly owing someone your attention, your forgiveness, your understanding, or your acceptance of their poor treatment, then it's time to walk away. Real love doesn't keep a running tally of what you owe. Don't wait around hoping to be broken into accepting less than you deserve. Don't let someone convince you that their inability to commit is somehow your fault for expecting basic respect and honesty. Because sometimes the greatest act of love you can perform is choosing yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refusing to participate in your own diminishment. And I did exactly that. I chose peace over chaos. I chose honesty over comfortable lies. I chose my own self-respect over the illusion of a relationship that had died long before I was ready to admit it. In the end, that choice saved my life and gave me back my identity. It reminded me that I am worth more than being someone's backup plan or their safe harbor while they explore other options. I deserved better than what Victoria was offering, and I finally had the courage to demand it.